I never liked bowling nights. Too many people, too much noise, and too much pretending to have fun when all I really wanted was to be back in my dorm with my headphones on and my thoughts quiet. There's something about forced social situations that makes my skin crawl, like everyone can see right through me, see how much I don't belong, how desperately I'm trying to fade into the background while simultaneously being dragged into the center of attention. My cousin Caitlin had begged me to come that evening. She cornered me in the dining hall that afternoon, her eyes pleading in that way only family can manage, and said I'd been in college for 3 weeks and couldn't hide forever. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been avoiding the whole college experience, keeping my head down in classes, eating meals alone with a book propped against my water bottle, declining every invitation to parties or games or whatever bonding activities freshmen were supposed to do. But the moment I walked into that neon-lit bowling alley, the artificial glow washing everything in shades of purple and electric blue, I knew I'd made a mistake. The music pounded through speakers mounted in every corner, some pop song I'd heard 1,000 times, but never actually listened to. The laughter was even louder than the music, sharp, performative, the kind that says look how much fun we're having rather than actually having it. Everyone seemed to know everyone else. They had that easy familiarity, those inside jokes, that casual touching of shoulders and playful shoving that spoke of friendships already formed. I was on the outside looking in as usual. Caitlin's boyfriend Fred was already caught up in a friendly match with his team, showing off like it was some championship event, his voice carrying across the lanes as he trash-talked his opponents. I sat at the edge of our assigned lane, pretending to be amused, my hands wrapped around a half-empty soda that had gone flat 20 minutes ago. The condensation from the cup dripped onto my jeans. I watched the wet spot spread, focusing on that instead of the party happening around me. Someone knocked down a strike 3 lanes over and hooped loud enough to make me flinch. A group of girls passed behind me, their perfume mixing into something cloying and sweet that made my head hurt. That's when I saw her. Lara. She walked in with a small group, 3 guys and another girl, but she might as well have walked in alone. Her confidence was impossible to ignore, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but simply exists, taking up space without apology. She wasn't loud like the others, didn't need to be. People noticed her without her even trying, heads turning as she passed, conversations pausing mid-sentence. Her hair was dark and loose, falling past her shoulders in waves that caught the strange lighting of the alley. She wore black jeans that fit like they'd been made for her, and a leather jacket that should have looked too heavy for the warm evening, but somehow didn't. When she laughed at something the guy beside her said, the sound cut through all the noise and landed somewhere in my chest. I recognized him immediately. Nick. The so-called best bowler on campus, though that seemed like the least interesting thing about him. He was the bad boy everyone warned you about, the one who'd been suspended twice already, who showed up to class when he felt like it, who had a reputation that preceded him like a storm cloud. Dark hair, darker eyes, that smirk that said he knew exactly what people thought of him and didn't care. And Lara was his girlfriend. Of course she was. Everyone talked about her. In the 3 weeks I'd been on campus, I'd heard her name whispered in bathroom stalls, mentioned in passing in the quad, discussed in hushed tones in the library. The bad girl who broke hearts, skipped classes, and made professors sigh with a mixture of exasperation and reluctant admiration. She was the kind of person stories accumulated around like dust, half of them probably untrue, but repeated anyway because they sounded right. But in that moment, watching her smile under the blue glow of the alley lights, I didn't see trouble. I didn't see the reputation or the rumors or the warning labels everyone tried to stick on her. I saw something magnetic, something that pulled at me in a way I couldn't understand and didn't want to examine too closely. She leaned close to Nick, rose up on her toes to whisper something into his ear. Her hand rested on his chest, casual and possessive. They started to leave, her laugh trailing behind them as they headed toward the exit. As they passed my lane, I caught the scent of her perfume, soft and sharp at once, something floral underneath something darker, the kind that clings to you even when the person is gone. And then, just before stepping out into the parking lot, she looked at me. A single glance. Quick but deliberate. Not accidental, not a passing sweep of the room. Her eyes found mine with precision, held them for exactly 3 heartbeats, and in those 3 heartbeats the entire world narrowed to just that connection. The kind of look that burns through every layer of calm you've built around yourself, every defense you've carefully constructed, every wall you've put up to keep people at a safe distance. It stripped all of that away and left me exposed, vulnerable, seen in a way that terrified me. My heart skipped. I didn't even breathe. Couldn't breathe. She didn't smile, just watched me for that suspended moment, the corner of her mouth curling slightly, barely perceptible but definitely there. Like she was saying, "I see you." Like she knew something I didn't. Like she'd just reached across the space between us and touched something I'd kept hidden even from myself. And then she was gone. The sounds around me faded into meaningless noise, the laughter, the pins crashing, Caitlin calling my name from somewhere that felt miles away. Everything blurred into the background, becoming texture without detail, sound without meaning. All I could think about was that look, that side glance that somehow felt like it meant everything and nothing at once. I don't remember the rest of that night. I must have bowled, must have talked to Caitlin, must have gotten back to campus somehow. But all of it was lost, erased by those 3 heartbeats when Lara's eyes had found mine. That night, lying in bed with my roommate snoring softly across the room, I couldn't stop replaying it. The way her lips moved when she spoke to Nick, the slow confidence in her walk, the spark in her eyes during that glance. It was ridiculous. I'd barely seen her, hadn't spoken a single word to her, and yet she was all I could think about. The digital clock on my desk flicked from 2:47 to 2:48 a.m. I watched the numbers change, my mind refusing to quiet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. The flash of her glance, the way her voice might sound if she said my name, the way her hair moved when she turned her head. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I was fascinated because she was the kind of girl I'd never be, confident where I was anxious, bold where I was timid, completely at ease in social situations that made me want to dissolve into the floor. But deep down, I knew better. Something inside me had shifted, like a compass needle swinging toward magnetic north. A pull I couldn't ignore even if I wanted to. And I couldn't tell if I should be terrified or thrilled. Maybe both. Probably both. I barely slept that night. Maybe 2 hours total, broken into restless fragments full of half-dreams that didn't make sense. Every time I drifted off, I'd jerk awake, my heart racing, the image of her burned into the back of my eyelids. By morning, I'd convinced myself to forget it. I stood in front of my tiny dorm mirror, repeating the logic like a mantra while I got ready for class. She was just a girl, a beautiful one, yes, but taken, untouchable, and way out of my world. She had a boyfriend. She had a reputation. She probably gave looks like that to everyone, and they meant nothing, just part of her persona, part of whatever game she was playing. I told myself that over and over as I dressed, as I brushed my teeth, as I gathered my books for class. But my heart didn't believe a word of it. My heart was still racing, still caught on those 3 heartbeats, still hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, it had meant something. When I walked into the lecture hall, I was running late as usual. I'd gotten turned around trying to find a bathroom, then couldn't remember which building I was supposed to be in, and by the time I found the right room, half the seats were already filled. I slipped quietly into one near the middle, trying not to draw attention, hoping the professor wouldn't notice my entrance. The professor droned on about something I'd already forgotten, statistics, maybe, or economics, one of those required courses that all bled together into a haze of numbers and graphs. My mind wandered almost immediately right back to her. I couldn't help it. The trajectory of my thoughts had been set, and I was powerless to change course. I wondered what kind of music she liked. Was she into the same indie bands I listened to alone in my room, or did she prefer something harder, something that matched that leather jacket and that reputation? What did she look like when she wasn't surrounded by noise and people? Did she have quiet moments, vulnerable moments, times when she let that armor drop? And that look she gave me, had it meant anything, or was I just imagining significance where there was none? Was I so starved for connection, so desperate to feel seen, that I'd built an entire fantasy around a 3-second glance? The door opened. The sound snapped me out of my spiraling thoughts. Everyone turned to see who it was, the collective curiosity of a bored classroom grateful for any distraction. And there she stood in the doorway. Lara. I froze. For a moment I honestly thought I was dreaming. That lack of sleep had finally caught up with me, and I'd slipped into some wish-fulfillment hallucination. I blinked hard, expecting her to disappear. She didn't. She wasn't supposed to be here. This was an introductory course, freshman level, and she was definitely not a freshman. But there she stood, leaning casually against the doorframe, her confidence filling the room like smoke, spreading into every corner until it felt like the air itself had changed composition. She wasn't looking for me. I knew that immediately. Her eyes scanned the room with purpose, looking for someone specific, and when they landed on a guy 3 rows ahead, dark hair, younger looking, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, recognition flickered across her face. Her younger brother. I'd heard people mention him, though I'd never made the connection before. He'd just started college too, apparently. And of course he was in my class. Because the universe had a sense of humor. She talked to him briefly, her voice calm and low and effortless, carrying across the room even though she wasn't speaking loudly. I tried so hard not to stare, kept my eyes on my notebook, on my hands, on the desk in front of me, but it was impossible. My heart thudded in my chest, my throat tight, every nerve ending suddenly aware of her presence, like she was generating some kind of electromagnetic field. When her eyes finally met mine, it was like lightning again. The same jolt, the same breathless suspension of time. But this time, in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the lecture hall, I could see her expression more clearly. She didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked amused, like she'd been expecting this, like she'd known exactly where I'd be. She started walking toward me. My brain stopped functioning. I watched her approach, her steps slow and confident, like she knew exactly what she was doing and was enjoying every second of it. She moved between the rows of desks, her eyes never leaving mine, and I could barely breathe. Could barely think. Could barely remember my own name. She stopped beside my desk, close enough that I could smell that perfume again, the same one from last night, floral and dark and intoxicating. Close enough that I had to tilt my head up to meet her eyes. The entire class was watching now. I could feel their stares, their curiosity, their judgment. But Lara didn't seem to notice or care. She looked at me like we were the only two people in the room. Her lips curved into a small smile, and when she spoke, her voice was pitched low, meant just for me despite the audience. I don't know how long we stood there, how many seconds passed while she looked at me with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense I'd ever built. Time felt elastic, stretched and compressed simultaneously. Then she left, walking back toward the door where her brother was gathering his things. Just before stepping out, she looked back, that same deliberate glance as the night before, and her smile deepened just slightly. The door closed behind her. The professor cleared his throat and resumed the lecture. Around me, people turned back to their notes, whispered to their neighbors, moved on with their day. But I sat there, frozen, trying to breathe, trying to understand what had just happened. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my desk, but they wouldn't stop trembling. The professor's voice faded completely, became nothing but background static. My thoughts were a blur of confusion and excitement and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Because she'd walked across that entire room just to talk to me. Had looked at me like I mattered. Like I was someone worth noticing. All I knew was that something had shifted again, even more dramatically than the night before. The compass needle that had swung toward her was now locked in place, pointing true north with absolute certainty. The rest of that day was torture in the sweetest possible way. Every class, every minute, every conversation with Caitlin, it all blurred into background noise that barely registered. I went through the motions of being present, of taking notes, of nodding at appropriate times, but none of it penetrated the fog that had settled over my brain. All I could think about was her. Lara. The way she'd said those words, the way her eyes had lingered on mine just long enough to leave me breathless and wanting more. By afternoon, my heart felt like it was on a timer, counting down to something I couldn't name but desperately wanted. I told myself I was overthinking it, building castles from sand, seeing patterns that didn't exist. That maybe she was just naturally flirtatious, that maybe this was how she talked to everyone. That maybe I was misreading everything because I wanted so badly for it to be real. But then I remembered the way her fingers had brushed mine, so brief it could have been accidental, but it hadn't felt accidental. Nothing about her felt accidental. Every movement, every word, every glance seemed calculated, purposeful, chosen. When I got back to my dorm late that afternoon, my roommate was gone, probably at practice or the library or wherever she disappeared to most evenings. I threw my bag on the bed and started pacing the small space, from the door to the window and back again, my footsteps wearing an invisible path in the cheap carpet. My heart wouldn't settle. Every sound made me jump, the hum of the mini fridge, the footsteps outside my door, voices in the hallway. I felt like I was waiting for something without knowing what it was, anticipation building in my chest until it was hard to breathe normally. I tried reading, picking up the novel I'd been working through for the past week. I read the same paragraph 5 times without comprehending a single word. I tried music, putting in my headphones and scrolling through playlists, but nothing sounded right. Everything was either too loud or too quiet, too fast or too slow, wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. Nothing helped. Nothing could quiet the chaos in my head or slow the racing of my pulse. At some point, I just sat there on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone. Her number glowed on the screen. I'd saved it as soon as I got back to my room, typing it in carefully, triple-checking every digit. Just seeing it made my stomach flip. It was 5 o'clock. The light through my window was starting to fade, that golden hour where everything looks softer, more forgiving. I watched dust motes drift through the sunbeams, my mind both blank and racing. I don't even know what came over me, what surge of courage or moment of insanity pushed me forward. But before I could stop myself, before I could talk myself out of it or overthink it into paralysis, my thumb was moving, pressing the call button. My hand shook as I held the phone to my ear. The ringing sounded impossibly loud in the quiet of my room. Once. Twice. Maybe she wouldn't answer. Maybe she'd given me a fake number, some random digits to get rid of me politely. Maybe. She picked up after just one ring, before I could spiral any further. Her voice came through, warm and teasing and somehow intimate despite the distance between us, and my breath caught in my throat. Just hearing her voice again, without the buffer of physical space, without the distraction of visual input, hit differently. More direct. More intense. I managed to respond, my voice barely steady, and she laughed, that low, beautiful sound that I'd already started cataloging in my memory alongside every other detail about her. She said she hadn't expected me to call so early, and there was something in her tone that suggested she was pleased I had, that maybe she'd been hoping I would. I laughed nervously, the sound awkward even to my own ears, and there was silence for a second. Not uncomfortable silence, but charged silence, the kind that feels heavy with things neither person knows how to say yet. The kind where you can hear the other person breathing and it feels intimate. Words tumbled out of me then, clumsy and revealing. I asked her what someone should do when another person gets stuck in their head, when they can't stop thinking about them, when they take over everything. Even as I said it, I knew how obvious it was, how transparent. But I couldn't stop myself. Lara didn't answer right away. I could hear her soft exhale on the other end, could picture her expression even though I couldn't see her face. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped lower, almost to a whisper, and it sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. She said maybe I should tell them how I feel. The words hung between us, loaded with meaning, with invitation, with possibility. I didn't know what to say to that, couldn't trust myself to respond without giving away too much, or maybe I'd already given away everything and we were both just pretending otherwise. I thanked her, my voice small, and hung up before I could embarrass myself any further. I stared at the phone for a long time afterward, my heart racing, my thoughts spinning. Did she know I meant her? She had to know. There was no way she didn't know. Did she want me to say it outright? Was she waiting for me to be brave enough to admit it? I didn't know. But I couldn't stop smiling, this ridiculous grin that made my cheeks hurt, but I couldn't control. Somewhere, miles away, or maybe just across campus, maybe she was smiling too. Maybe she'd whispered something under her breath after hanging up, something soft meant only for herself. Something like "I like you too, you beautiful idiot." I didn't know it yet, but soon, very soon, everything would change. Not in the loud, dramatic way books and movies make it look, with declarations and grand gestures. But in the quiet, trembling kind of way where your whole life suddenly feels like it's about to begin, where you realize you've been holding your breath for years and are finally learning how to breathe. The hours between that phone call and 7 o'clock moved both impossibly slowly and terrifyingly fast. I changed my outfit 3 times, trying to find something that looked casual but intentional, effortless but thoughtful. I settled on jeans that actually fit properly and a soft sweater that made me feel less exposed. I debated whether to tie my hair or leave it loose, ultimately deciding on loose because tying it made me look like I was trying too hard. Then I second-guessed that decision and almost put it up again. I stood in front of my mirror, studying my reflection with an intensity usually reserved for final exams, seeing every flaw magnified. I almost canceled twice. My finger hovered over her contact, ready to type out some excuse. Wasn't feeling well, forgot about an assignment, family emergency. But each time, I couldn't make myself do it. Something stronger than my fear kept pulling me forward. It wasn't fear of her exactly. It was fear of what she made me feel, fear of the intensity of it, fear of how much I wanted something I'd never even known I was allowed to want. Fear of the way she made me question everything I thought I understood about myself. When the knock came, I froze completely, my whole body going rigid. It was soft but deliberate, 2 taps and a pause, like a secret code. I stared at the door for several heartbeats, my pulse thundering in my ears. This was it. The moment where everything either fell apart or became something else entirely. The moment where I could still turn back, could still pretend none of this was happening, could still retreat to the safety of not knowing. But I didn't want safety anymore. I wanted whatever was on the other side of that door. I opened it, and there she was. Lara. Her hair framed her face perfectly, catching the hallway light in a way that made it look almost liquid. Her lips were painted a soft shade of red that made it impossible not to stare, to wonder what they'd feel like. She wasn't even dressed up, just jeans and that same black jacket from the bowling alley, but she looked like she'd stepped out of someone's fever dream. We both stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. The air between us felt alive, crackling with electricity, heavy with everything we weren't saying. My hands were trembling. I clenched them into fists, trying to hide it. She smiled, slow and knowing, and stepped a little closer. Close enough that I could smell her perfume, could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could count her eyelashes if I wanted to. She said she'd been thinking about my phone call ever since it happened, and the way she said it, like it mattered, like I'd affected her day the same way she'd affected mine, made something warm bloom in my chest. I tried to apologize for bothering her, the words automatic, defensive. But she cut me off gently, saying I hadn't bothered her at all, that I'd made her day. And the sincerity in her voice, the way she looked at me when she said it, made me believe her. Her hand brushed against mine, and it was such a small thing, barely contact at all, just the whisper of skin against skin, but it felt like the world tilted slightly when she did it. Like gravity had shifted, like up and down had switched places. She told me I looked nervous, and I admitted that maybe I was. Because how could I not be? Standing this close to her, feeling the heat radiating from her body, seeing the way she looked at me like I was something precious and fascinating, it was overwhelming in the best and worst possible way. Lara's gaze softened then, and she stepped even closer, close enough that I could feel her breath against my cheek, warm and steady. She whispered for me to relax, that she didn't bite, and there was something playful in her tone, but also something serious underneath it, something that said, I'm safe, you're safe, we're safe together. And then, before I could think or prepare or brace myself, she kissed me. It wasn't sudden or rough, wasn't the way I'd imagined first kisses were supposed to be, awkward and fumbling and uncertain. It was slow, patient, deliberate. The kind of kiss that starts as curiosity and becomes something else entirely, something deeper and more meaningful. Her lips were soft and warm and certain. Mine trembled at first, unsure, but then gave in, surrendered to the moment. The world fell away, the noise from the hallway, the ticking of the clock on my desk, even the air between us, everything disappeared except her. Except this. When she finally pulled back, my heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt. A physical ache in my chest that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with feeling too much at once. She murmured something about leaving clues, about me being either oblivious or enjoying making her wait, and her thumb brushed lightly against my jaw, the touch sending sparks along my skin. I tried to explain, my voice breaking, that I'd thought she hadn't even noticed me. That since she had a boyfriend, I figured I didn't stand a chance. That girls like her didn't notice girls like me. She smiled faintly, that same teasing glint in her eyes, and said I really shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Then her voice turned quieter, more serious, more vulnerable than I'd heard it before. She admitted she did have a boyfriend, and my heart sank for a moment before she continued. She said she didn't think she liked him anymore, that he wasn't who he used to be, that all the attention and reputation had changed him, made him into someone she didn't recognize, someone who didn't see her anymore. That she didn't want to keep pretending to be happy when she wasn't. Her eyes met mine, searching, and she said that then I showed up. The way she said it, it wasn't just flattery or a line. It sounded like confession, like truth she'd been holding onto and finally felt safe enough to release. It sounded like relief. She said I was different, that I made her feel calm and curious and a little crazy all at once. That when she was with me, the noise in her head finally quieted. That I made her want things she'd stopped letting herself want. I couldn't stop smiling, this ridiculous grin that made my face hurt, but I couldn't control. My cheeks were burning, my pulse still wild, everything inside me singing. I admitted then, softly, that it was my first time kissing a girl. The words felt vulnerable, exposing, but I wanted her to know. Wanted her to understand what this meant, how significant this moment was. But I also told her that if it was with her, I didn't mind doing it again. That I wanted to do it again. Her smile turned playful, and she whispered that I was allowed. That I was more than allowed. And she kissed me again, slower this time, deeper, like she wanted to memorize every heartbeat between us, like she was trying to communicate something words couldn't capture. Her hands found my waist, her touch light but certain, like she'd been waiting to do this for much longer than I'd realized. The second kiss felt different. The first had been a question, uncertain despite its confidence, asking permission and offering possibility. This one was an answer, definitive and sure. This one said yes, this is real, this is happening, this is what we both want. Her hands found my waist and stayed there, not demanding but present, her touch warm even through my sweater. I felt the pressure of her palms, and every thought I'd been holding onto just melted away. There was no more analysis, no more questioning, no more fear. Just this moment, just us, just the feeling of being exactly where I was supposed to be. When our lips finally parted, we just stood there, forehead to forehead, catching our breath. The air felt heavier now, charged with something neither of us dared name yet, but both of us recognized. My hands had found their way to her shoulders at some point, and I could feel her heartbeat, fast, matching mine. She asked if I was okay, her voice soft and genuinely concerned, and I nodded. I told her I didn't think I'd ever felt more okay than right now, and I meant it. For the first time in my life, I felt completely present, completely myself, completely at peace. She smiled, a real one this time, not her usual teasing smirk, but something quieter, more vulnerable. She said she didn't want me to be scared of this, of her, of whatever was happening between us. I told her truthfully that I wasn't scared, that I was just trying not to wake up, trying to hold on to this moment before reality came crashing back in and told me I couldn't have this. She laughed, that low, beautiful sound that I was already addicted to, and took my hand, pulling me gently back into my room. I don't remember closing the door. Don't remember the music that was still playing faintly from my phone. Don't remember any of the details that usually anchor moments in memory. All I remember was her, the way she smelled like flowers and secrets, the way her fingers trailed up my arm leaving goosebumps in their wake, the way she looked at me like I was something precious and rare. We sat on the edge of my bed, still facing each other, our knees touching. There was no rush, no script to follow, no roadmap for where this was going. Just this quiet, magnetic pull drawing us closer, inevitable and gentle. She reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, her fingers lingering against my skin. She said I had no idea what I did to her, and I shook my head because I genuinely didn't. How could I? How could someone like me have any effect on someone like her? She smirked playfully and said she'd have to show me sometime, and the promise in those words made my stomach flip. I laughed, nervous and flustered, and she leaned in again, not to kiss me this time, but to rest her forehead against mine. We stayed like that for a while, just breathing, just being present with each other in the quiet. Her thumb traced slow circles on the back of my hand, the touch meditative, soothing. She whispered that she hadn't felt like this in a long time. That with Nick, everything was loud, constant noise, constant performance, constant showing off for an audience that never stopped watching. But this, me, us, it was quiet, peaceful, real. She said I made her feel things she'd forgotten she could feel. I looked up at her then, really looked at her, past the confidence and the reputation and the armor. Beneath all of that was someone tired of pretending, someone who wanted to be seen for who she really was instead of who everyone assumed she was. Someone lonely despite always being surrounded by people. So I told her, softly, that she didn't have to be anyone else when she was with me. That she could just be herself, whatever that meant, and it would be enough. More than enough. Her eyes softened, glistening slightly in the dim light from my desk lamp. She smiled, and then kissed me again, a slow, gentle kiss that said everything words couldn't capture. Thank you. I see you. I trust you. This matters. We lay back after that, still holding each other, our bodies fitting together like they'd been designed for this. She ran her fingers through my hair, tracing the curve of my shoulder, my jaw, my lips, like she was trying to memorize every inch of me without saying a word. Learning me through touch. It wasn't about hunger anymore, wasn't about passion or desire in the consuming way. It was about trust, about vulnerability, about the unspoken understanding that something between us had shifted forever, and we were both choosing to let it happen. At one point, she whispered that I was dangerous, and I smiled against her skin, asking why. She said it was because she could get used to this, to me, to the way I made her feel. And in that moment, with her arms around me, her heartbeat pressed against mine, her breath warm against my neck, I realized something too. I already was. I was already used to this, already addicted to the feeling of being close to her, already unable to imagine going back to how things were before. She'd become essential in the span of hours, necessary in a way that should have terrified me but instead felt right. We talked in whispers as the night deepened outside my window, sharing pieces of ourselves we usually kept hidden. She told me about growing up always feeling like she had to prove something, always being compared to her older siblings who'd done everything right. About how the bad girl reputation had started as rebellion and become a cage she didn't know how to escape. I told her about being invisible my whole life, about perfecting the art of taking up as little space as possible, about the constant fear that if people really saw me they wouldn't like what they found. about how exhausting it was to always be accommodating everyone else's needs while burying my own. She said she saw me, really saw me, and that what she found was beautiful. No one had ever called me beautiful before. Not like that. Not in a way that felt like truth rather than politeness. I don't know when we fell asleep. At some point, between the soft conversations and the slower, unhurried kisses, between the gentle exploration and the quiet laughter, the night slipped away. The boundaries between waking and sleeping blurred until I couldn't tell which was which. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was her, Lara, lying beside me, hair messy and beautiful, eyes half open, sunlight streaming through my window and tracing the curve of her shoulder, the line of her neck. She looked different in daylight, softer and more human in a way she didn't let the world see. Vulnerable. Real. For a second, I just watched her breathe, watched the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks. I didn't want to move or speak or do anything that might shatter this perfect moment. I wanted to remember everything about it, the quality of the light, the warmth of her body next to mine, the impossible calm I felt just being near her. She murmured good morning, eyes still closed, and I whispered it back. She smiled lazily and stretched, her hand finding mine beneath the blanket, our fingers automatically lacing together like they belonged that way. She said she could get used to waking up like this, and I laughed softly, saying she only thought that now. But she insisted she meant it, and the certainty in her voice made me believe her. Then her phone buzzed on the nightstand, harsh and intrusive in our peaceful bubble. We both froze. She didn't need to check it. We both knew who it was even before the name lit up the screen. Nick. The reminder of the world waiting outside this small space we'd carved out for ourselves, demanding her attention, demanding answers. Lara sighed, a sound that carried the weight of decisions made and unmade. She picked it up, stared at the screen for a long moment, and then answered. Her voice was calm, steady, nothing like the softness she'd used with me all night. I could hear his voice on the other end, angry, sharp, demanding. I couldn't make out the words, but his tone said enough. He was used to getting what he wanted, used to Lara being available whenever he decided to pay attention to her. She said she wouldn't be coming, her voice even and final. Another burst of shouting erupted from the phone, loud enough that I could hear the anger even if I couldn't distinguish the words. Lara's jaw tightened slightly, the only sign that it affected her at all. She said that was how it was, simple and direct, and then she hung up. She set the phone down on the nightstand, exhaled slowly, and turned toward me with a small smile. There was relief in her expression, mixed with something that looked like freedom. She said that felt good, and I could hear the truth in it. This wasn't just about me, wasn't just about whatever was happening between us. This was about her finally choosing herself, finally walking away from something that had stopped serving her a long time ago. I asked if she was okay, needing to know, needing to be sure she wasn't going to regret this decision once the initial rush wore off. She nodded, said she'd just done something she should have done months ago. That she'd been holding on to something that was already gone, trying to make it work when it had been broken for longer than she'd wanted to admit. She leaned in and kissed me, soft and sure, and thanked me. I asked her what for, genuinely confused about what I'd done besides exist in her orbit. She said I'd reminded her what it felt like to be seen, really seen, not as an accessory or a conquest or a reputation, but as a person. I didn't know what to say to that, couldn't find words adequate to express what that meant to me, so I just kissed her back, a quiet, wordless answer that hopefully conveyed everything I couldn't articulate. Later that morning, After we'd untangled ourselves from each other and from the sheets, we got dressed in comfortable silence. Not awkward silence, but the kind that exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with sound. She borrowed one of my hoodies, and seeing her in my clothes did something to me that I didn't have language for yet. We headed out together into the bright morning. The campus was calm, sunlight spilling across the walkways in golden pools, students chatting in small groups, the whole world going about its normal business, while mine had fundamentally shifted overnight. For the first time in weeks, I didn't care who saw me. Didn't care about being invisible or taking up too little space. I was walking across campus with a beautiful girl who'd chosen me, and that felt more important than any fear I'd been carrying. As we passed the old bowling alley, Lara stopped and smiled, looking at the building like it held some secret only she understood. She said it was funny how all of this had started because of one look. I said quietly that she'd looked back because that was the part that mattered. Not that I'd been staring at her like some love-struck fool, but that she'd noticed, that she'd seen me, that she'd chosen to acknowledge that moment instead of letting it pass. She reached for my hand, not hidden, not hesitant, not checking to see who might be watching. Just reached out and laced her fingers through mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like we'd been doing this for years instead of hours. People walked by, some probably noticing, some not. A few heads turned, a few whispers started, but for once none of that mattered. Let them look. Let them talk. Let them create whatever narratives they wanted. I knew the truth. I looked up at her, and she smiled that same smile that had started everything at the bowling alley. Only now it wasn't teasing or mysterious or designed to keep people at a distance. It was real, genuine, just for me. And as we walked across the bright morning campus, our hands intertwined, our shoulders occasionally bumping, I realized something simple and certain. I didn't just like her. I was falling for her, had probably already fallen, was somewhere in that space between fascination and devotion that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The days that followed blurred together in the best possible way. Lara and I fell into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, like we were inventing something while simultaneously discovering something that had always existed. We'd meet between classes, stealing moments in corners of the library, on benches under trees that were just starting to turn autumn colors, in the back rows of lecture halls where we'd whisper instead of taking notes. Every interaction felt charged, significant, like we were building something important one small moment at a time. She introduced me to her friends, a smaller circle than I'd expected, people who knew the real her beneath the reputation. They welcomed me with surprising warmth, teasing her about finally finding someone who made her smile like that, someone who brought out the softness she usually kept hidden. I introduced her to Caitlin, who took one look at us together and grinned like she'd won some sort of bet. She pulled me aside later and said she'd never seen me look so alive, so present, so genuinely happy. And she was right. I felt like I'd been living in grayscale and suddenly the world had color. But it wasn't all easy. Nick didn't take the breakup well. He tried calling repeatedly, showing up places he knew Lara would be, making scenes designed to embarrass her into coming back. She handled it with more grace than he deserved, staying calm, staying firm, refusing to engage with his manipulation. One afternoon, about a week after that first night, he cornered us outside the student center. I saw him approaching and my whole body tensed, but Lara's hand tightened around mine, steadying me. He demanded to know what was going on, why she was throwing away what they had for someone like me. The way he said it, dripping with contempt, made my face burn. But before I could respond, before I could shrink away like I usually did when confronted, Lara stepped forward. She told him she wasn't throwing anything away because there was nothing left to throw. That what they'd had was over long before she'd ended it, that he'd checked out months ago when his reputation became more important than their relationship. That she deserved better than being someone's occasional accessory. He tried to argue, tried to make promises about changing, but she cut him off. Said she was done, that she'd found someone who actually saw her, who actually cared about who she was instead of what she looked like on their arm. And then she walked away, pulling me with her, leaving him standing there. My hands were shaking. The confrontation had triggered every anxiety I usually carried, but Lara pulled me into an empty classroom and held me until I stopped trembling. She apologized for putting me through that, for dragging me into her complicated situation. I told her she hadn't dragged me anywhere, that I'd chosen this, chosen her, chosen us. That whatever complications came with that were worth it. She kissed me then, desperate and grateful, and I kissed her back with everything I had. The weeks turned into a month, then 2. Autumn deepened, the campus transforming into something from a postcard, all orange and red and gold. Lara and I claimed a bench under a massive oak tree as our spot, spending hours there between classes, doing homework with our legs tangled together, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her family, about the pressure to be perfect that she'd rebelled against, about her older brother who was everything their parents wanted, and how she'd carved out her own identity in opposition. About how exhausting it was to maintain that image, to always be the bad girl, when sometimes she just wanted to be soft. I told her about growing up feeling invisible, about learning to be so accommodating that I'd lost track of what I actually wanted. About spending my whole life trying to take up less space until I'd almost disappeared entirely. About how being with her made me feel substantial for the first time. We learned each other's patterns, each other's tells. I learned that she chewed her bottom lip when she was thinking hard about something, that she got quiet when she was upset rather than loud, that she loved terrible reality TV shows and defended them with surprising passion, that she was secretly sentimental, keeping ticket stubs and receipts from places we'd been together. She learned that I hummed without realizing it when I was content, that I needed time alone to recharge after too much social interaction, that I had strong opinions about book adaptations and would argue about them for hours. That I collected quotes I liked in a small notebook I carried everywhere. My roommate got used to Lara being around, eventually just accepting that our room had become partially hers too. Lara's apartment, shared with 2 other girls who were never there, became our refuge when we needed more privacy than a dorm room could offer. We'd cook together, terrible meals that were barely edible because neither of us really knew what we were doing, laughing as we burned pasta or over-salted soup. We'd fall asleep on her couch watching movies, her fingers running through my hair, my head on her chest listening to her heartbeat. Everything felt easy with her, natural, like this was what I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. Like every awkward date I'd been on before, every failed connection, had just been leading me here. Halloween came, bringing with it costume parties and cooler weather. Lara convinced me to go to a party with her, something I'd normally avoid, and we went as a matched set, her idea entirely. She painted whiskers on both our faces, and we spent the night dancing badly to music that was too loud, drinking drinks that were too sweet, surrounded by people who faded into background noise. At one point, we ended up on a balcony, away from the crowd, just the 2 of us looking out at the campus lit up below. She had her arm around my waist, and I leaned into her warmth, perfectly content. She said she'd been thinking about something, her voice careful, and I tensed slightly, worried about where this was going. She must have felt it because she pulled me closer, reassuring without words. She said she'd been thinking about how she wanted to introduce me to her family, to make this official in a way that went beyond just us. That she wanted people to know I wasn't just someone she was seeing casually, that this mattered, that I mattered. My heart did something complicated in my chest, fear and joy tangled together. Meeting families was serious, was the kind of thing that meant future and commitment and all the scary words I'd never let myself think about before. But I said yes, because of course I did. Because I wanted that too, wanted to be part of her life in every way, wanted to stop feeling like this was temporary or fragile or something that might disappear if I looked at it too directly. She kissed me there on that balcony, slow and sweet, and I kissed her back while the party continued without us, while the world kept spinning, while we created our own small moment of perfect stillness. Thanksgiving break arrived faster than I'd expected. Lara invited me to come home with her for the holiday, to meet her family, and despite my nervousness, I agreed. Caitlin was disappointed I wouldn't be at the family gathering, but understanding, giving me a knowing smile and telling me to text her if I needed an escape plan. The drive to Lara's hometown was 3 hours, filled with music and conversation and comfortable silences. She held my hand when she wasn't shifting gears, her thumb tracing absent patterns on my skin. We stopped at a rest area halfway, getting terrible sandwiches and decent drinks, sitting in the car for an extra 20 minutes just talking. She warned me that her family could be intense, that her mother asked invasive questions, that her father was quiet but observant, that her siblings would probably gang up on her in that way families do. That her brother, the younger one from my class, had already figured out we were together and was supportive, which helped. I told her I was nervous but ready, that I wanted to meet the people who'd made her, who she'd rebelled against and loved in equal measure. That I wanted to understand her in this fuller way. Her childhood home was beautiful, a sprawling house in a neighborhood where every lawn was perfectly maintained and every house looked like it belonged in a magazine. Her mother opened the door before we'd even knocked, pulling Lara into a hug and then turning to me with a warm smile that put some of my fears to rest. Dinner that night was overwhelming in the best way, loud and chaotic, everyone talking over each other, stories being told and retold, laughter filling every corner. Lara's hand found mine under the table at one point, squeezing gently, anchoring me. Her mother asked about school, about my major, about my family. Normal questions that I could answer easily enough. Her father watched quietly, assessing, but not unkindly. Her siblings teased Lara mercilessly, but included me in the jokes, making me feel like part of the family rather than an outsider looking in. Later that night, in Lara's childhood bedroom surrounded by remnants of who she used to be, posters and trophies and photographs, she asked if I was okay. I said I was more than okay, that her family was wonderful, that I could see where she got her strength from. She kissed me softly, careful because her family was just down the hall, and whispered that she was glad I was there. That having me in her childhood home, in this space that held so much of her history, felt significant, felt right. I fell asleep that night in her bed, chaste and careful with her family nearby, feeling like I'd found something I hadn't known I was looking for. Not just her, but this sense of belonging, this feeling of being welcomed into someone's life completely. We returned to campus after the break changed somehow. Closer, more settled, like we'd crossed some invisible threshold and were now on the other side. Winter started creeping in, bringing cold weather and early darkness, and we adapted our routines accordingly. We studied together in the library, her foot hooked around my ankle under the table, passing notes when we were supposed to be working. We grabbed meals at the dining hall, sitting close enough that our shoulders touched, lost in our own world even surrounded by hundreds of other students. We went to basketball games we didn't care about just to have something to do, spending more time watching each other than the game. We walked across campus at night, bundled in coats and scarves, our breath visible in the cold air, talking about classes and future plans and what we wanted from life. Finals approached, bringing stress and late nights. We set up camp in my dorm room, surrounded by textbooks and notes and empty energy drink cans, quizzing each other on material we'd both struggle to remember the moment the semester ended. One night, deep into studying, I looked up to find her watching me with this expression I couldn't quite read. I asked what she was thinking, and she smiled, shook her head, said it didn't matter. But I pressed, and finally she admitted she'd been thinking about how different her life was now compared to 6 months ago, before me. She said she'd been going through the motions before, playing a role, being who everyone expected her to be. That she'd been lonely even surrounded by people, disconnected even in relationships. That meeting me had woken something up, made her want things she'd stopped letting herself want. I didn't know what to say to that, overwhelmed by the weight of it, by the responsibility and the gift of being that person for her. So I kissed her instead, pouring everything I couldn't say into that kiss, hoping she understood. We finished finals in a blur of exhaustion and relief. Winter break loomed, meaning weeks apart, and neither of us was happy about it. We spent our last night before break tangled together in her bed, talking quietly about plans for the spring semester, about visiting each other over break if we could manage it, about how weird it would be to not see each other every day. She drove me to the bus station, my bag in her trunk, both of us dreading goodbye even though it was temporary. We sat in her car for an extra 20 minutes after arriving, neither wanting to be the one to end it. When I finally had to go, she kissed me goodbye, long and slow and devastating. Told me to text her when I got home, to call her whenever I wanted, that she'd miss me. I said the same, meaning every word, and then forced myself to get out of the car. I watched her drive away, standing in the cold with my bag at my feet, feeling the loss of her presence like an ache. But underneath the sadness was something else, certainty. Certainty that this was real, that it would last, that when we came back in January, we'd pick up exactly where we left off. Winter break was strange, being back home, being around family who didn't know about Lara yet. I'd told my parents I was seeing someone, kept it vague, not ready for the conversations that would follow. Caitlin knew, of course, demanded details I was happy to share, lived vicariously through my stories. Lara and I texted constantly, throughout every day, sending photos of nothing important, our meals, our books, the view from our windows. We called every night, talking until one of us was falling asleep, sometimes both of us, phones still connected as we drifted off. She told me about her days, about forced family time and awkward conversations with relatives who asked about Nick. I told her about mine, about helping my parents with holiday preparations, about seeing high school friends who felt like strangers now. We counted down the days until we'd be back on campus, back together. Made plans for everything we'd do when we returned, places we'd go, things we'd try, ways we'd spend our time. The anticipation was sweet torture, making the days drag while somehow also flying by. Christmas came and went. I spent it thinking about her, wondering what she was doing, wishing we were together. She sent me a present, a first edition of a book I'd mentioned loving once, months ago, something she'd remembered and hunted down. I cried when I opened it, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness. I'd sent her a necklace, delicate and simple, something she could wear every day. She texted me a photo of her wearing it within minutes of opening it, said she'd never take it off, and as far as I knew, she never did. New Year's Eve was the hardest, watching everyone around me celebrating while I felt her absence like a phantom limb. At midnight, instead of being at whatever party people were attending, I was on my phone with her, counting down together across the distance, whispering wishes for the year ahead. We made it through break. Not easily, not without missing each other constantly, but we made it. And when I finally saw her again, waiting for me at my dorm, having driven back early just to be there when I arrived, the reunion was everything I'd hoped for. She grabbed me as soon as I was out of my parents' car, held me like she'd been starving for the contact, and I held her back just as tightly. My parents exchanged knowing looks, probably figuring out what I hadn't explicitly said, but I didn't care. All I cared about was that I was back where I belonged, in her arms, starting a new semester of our life together. Spring semester started with a sense of possibility I'd never felt before. Lara and I signed up for a class together, the only one that fit both our schedules, and spent 3 hours a week sitting next to each other, passing notes, playing footsie under the table, barely paying attention to the professor. We went on actual dates now, not just hanging out but planned evenings. She took me to a museum an hour away, both of us wandering through exhibits, her hand in mine, stopping to discuss pieces that caught our attention. I took her to a small music venue where a band I liked was playing, both of us pressed against the stage, music washing over us. We became that couple, the one everyone recognized, the one that made other people believe in romance. I heard people talking about us sometimes, in bathrooms or in passing, saying we were cute together, saying they wanted what we had. It felt surreal, being visible in that way, being something people aspired to instead of something I was trying to hide. Valentine's Day arrived, that Hallmark holiday I'd always found ridiculous. But Lara went all out, showing up at my dorm with flowers and chocolates and a cheesy card that made me laugh and cry simultaneously. She'd made dinner reservations at a nice restaurant, somewhere way too expensive for college students, insisting she wanted to spoil me. I'd gotten her a jar full of handwritten notes, things I loved about her, memories we'd made, reasons I was grateful she'd looked back at me that night at the bowling alley. She cried reading through them, carefully folding each one and putting them back, saying she'd keep them forever. We went back to her apartment after dinner, full and happy, and spent the rest of the evening wrapped around each other, talking about the future in ways we hadn't quite dared before. She said she wanted to stay together after graduation, wanted to figure out whatever came next as a team. I said I wanted that too, had wanted it for months, but been too scared to say it out loud. The certainty between us was no longer frightening. It was comforting, grounding, the foundation everything else was built on. We talked about apartments we might share, cities we might move to, careers we might pursue. Nothing was concrete yet, but everything was possible. Spring brought warmer weather and busier schedules. We were both involved in different activities, had different friend groups, different demands on our time. But we made it work, carved out space for each other even when it seemed impossible. Some nights we only saw each other for 20 minutes between commitments, stealing kisses in hallways, catching up on each other's days in rushed conversations. Other nights we had hours, long stretches of time where we could be completely present with each other, making up for the rushed moments. We had our first real fight in March, something stupid about missed plans and poor communication. I'd gotten upset when she canceled on me last minute, not because of the cancellation, but because I'd been dealing with anxiety all day and had been counting on seeing her to feel grounded again. She'd gotten defensive, feeling like I was being unreasonable, like she wasn't allowed to have other priorities. We'd said things we didn't mean, both of us hurt and lashing out, and I'd ended up leaving her apartment in tears. We didn't talk for 2 days, both of us stubborn, both of us hurting. Caitlin told me I was being ridiculous, that relationships required communication and compromise. Lara's roommate apparently told her the same thing. Finally, Lara showed up at my dorm, looking as miserable as I felt. She apologized for being dismissive, for not understanding how much I'd needed her that day. I apologized for overreacting, for not communicating better about what I needed. We talked for hours, really talked, working through the issue and the feelings underneath it. And when we were done, when we'd reached understanding and forgiveness, we were somehow stronger than before. Like we'd tested the foundation and found it solid. The semester flew by in a blur of classes and assignments and stolen moments. Before I knew it, finals were approaching again, bringing with them the end of our first year together. We studied together like before, but with the added knowledge of how to support each other better, when to push and when to give space. We celebrated the end of each exam, slowly counting down to summer break. This time, the separation didn't feel as scary. We had a plan. We'd both gotten internships in the same city, different companies, but close enough to see each other regularly. We'd found a small apartment to sublet for the summer, our first place together, just for those few months. On the last day before summer break officially started, we packed up our dorm rooms, loading everything into her car and a borrowed truck. The campus was chaos, everyone moving out simultaneously, but we worked together efficiently, years of knowing each other compressed into months paying off. When we arrived at our summer apartment, tiny and old, but ours, we set everything down and just looked at each other, grinning. This was it. Our first real step toward the future we'd been talking about, the life we wanted to build together. That night, lying in our new bed in our new apartment, Lara rolled over to face me. The street light outside cast shadows across her face, making her look ethereal, otherworldly. She reached out, tracing my features with gentle fingers, and told me she loved me. It was the first time either of us had said it, though we'd both been thinking it for months. The words hung in the air between us, weighted with significance, with promise, with truth. I said it back immediately, no hesitation, no fear. Told her I loved her too, had loved her for longer than I'd admitted even to myself. That looking back at the bowling alley felt like a lifetime ago, like I'd been someone completely different before her. She kissed me then, slow and deep and full of emotion, and I kissed her back with everything I had. This was our beginning, the real one, the one where we chose each other consciously and completely. Everything that came before had just been prologue. This was where our story truly started, in a tiny apartment in a new city, two girls who'd found each other across a crowded bowling alley and decided to build something beautiful together. The future stretched out before us, unknown and exciting, full of possibilities we'd explore together. Whatever challenges came, whatever obstacles appeared, I knew we'd face them as a team. Because she looked back, and I'd been brave enough to let her see me, and everything that followed was the life I'd never dared to dream I could have. And it was perfect.